From Washington, this is the HPS Macrocast with Hamilton Place Strategies and Markets Policy Partners.
Good morning. It's Friday, November 8th, 2019. It's Tony Fratto, Hamilton Place Strategies, here in the studio in D.C. It's great to be back in the studio with John Fagan and Brendan Walsh with Markets Policy Partners. This is the HPS Macrocast. And we have a guest with us today, good friend Ross DeVol from Heartland Forward. I know Ross from his many distinguished years at the Milken Institute and leading their work. And we're going to come to talk to Ross in our second segment on the work that he's doing on generating growth in all of these communities in the heartland of America. And so a really great discussion to look forward to. But first, news on the trade war this week, which we think things are trending in the direction of getting a deal done. But I poured some cold water on that last week, and most of this week it looked like I was maybe wrong, but now maybe there are some questions. John, get us up to speed on the trade war?
Yeah, this week has really featured some somewhat garbled messaging on the trade, the state of play in trade negotiations.
What does "very" mean?
So, the contours of this mini deal, or the phase one deal, as the White House has labeled it, really were broadly about the U.S. Canceling the tariffs that were scheduled on October 15th and December 15th. In exchange for augmented agricultural purchases by China. Now, there were a couple of other things thrown in there, but that was understood to be the nucleus of that mini deal, that interim deal. And then the more substantive issues would be rolled into phases 2 and 3 later in 2020.
The fentanyl bust, we had been hearing that was specifically something the president wanted
as a good faith effort to show that they're taking action.
Exactly.
This week really began to feature indications that perhaps this mini deal wasn't so mini after all, and that the phase one could include a few more elements into it. And we saw indications early, actually over the weekend, a report from the Financial Times saying that the White House was open to potential rollback of already existing tariffs rather than just a cancellation as part of this deal. And we'd heard Commerce Secretary Ross saying that some licenses to sell for U.S. businesses to sell some gear to Huawei would be forthcoming. And then we got a sense that this might actually be less of a truce and more of a real de-escalation. Mm-hmm. And so we saw we've seen U.S. equities respond to positive stimuli on the trade front, for months now, of course.
And especially since mid-October. So we get to the point where the phase one is announced, and it's been upward climb. Since then, we're in record territory again. So we're setting a new record every day now in the Dow and S&P.
Right, and there was a sense that the Trump administration may be increasingly conciliatory in their posture on trade, and this was the rolling back previously in place tariffs was pretty new. That was unconfirmed from the U.S. side and sort of remained so, but that was something that lifted expectations even further. Commerce Secretary Ross also said that tariffs on EU and Japanese auto imports might not be necessary given the progress in discussions with that. This was all coming into this week. Things were really aligning, but there was a little bit,
and not just equities, but also global rates, where since September rates have really kind of moved up. I saw a stat today that since September, about $5 trillion worth of debt moved out of negative territory. So we were at $17 billion, a trillion. I keep, and now we're at, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around.
And this brightening,
now we're at 12.
Yeah, this brightening trade picture has certainly played into traders increasingly playing for a rebound in the global economy. But there was, some shadows of doubt that crept in over the ensuing days after Monday's really bright and sunny outlook for trade. Right. A few clouds crept in. There was a sense that maybe the Chinese were beginning to press their advantage a little bit further. There was there was discussion that the Chinese were pushing for a full rollback of all tariffs as a condition for this first phase agreement, which seemed to be a little more aggressive. And then the Commerce the Commerce Ministry spokesperson came out on Thursday, early Thursday morning, and said that they'd agreed in principle with the U.S. to a phased rollback of all existing tariffs in a balanced way, in a proportionate way, and the White House response was kind of silence for a while.
Until like
some garbled, some
maybe Larry Kudlow, the NEC director, came out and said, essentially, I mean, to a degree, yes, right. And I want to get into like what exactly we're talking about, which tariffs we're talking about, and just make that clear for people listening to this. But second, and then Peter Navarro, of course, came on and said, nothing is done until the president says it is, and of course that's true.
Peter Navarro definitely seems to be against rolling.
He doesn't want to roll back anything.
He's fine with December, but he doesn't want to roll back existing.
He's not even really fine with December. He would like to see December also. But Peter Navarro has never been involved in a trade negotiation. What's going on with the trade negotiations in this case and between these two parties who don't have a whole lot of trust with each other is the effort to make these commitments out loud and public so that you can't walk back from them. That was the dance that the Chinese were doing, which was to say, we will, yes, we are moving forward on a deal. We are getting close to a deal, and this is the thing that we're talking about. That's the thing that we're going to get in return. They just had the Communist Party conference recently. Things didn't blow up after the Communist Party conference, so that is a good signal that it's probably are going to move in the right direction. But there is this one thing: they don't want not just future tariffs to roll back, but some previous tariffs to roll back, and they talked about it as phased tariff rollbacks, which isn't actually that far from the way the Americans were talking about phased tariff rollbacks as an enforcement mechanism for some of the structural things that they were talking about. So, it's actually within the bounds of what has been talked about for some time. And so maybe that's some progress, and we could feel a little bit more confident that that's probably going to get done, regardless of what Peter Navarro said. There's one thing true about what Peter Navarro said, is that any negotiation you've ever been in is nothing is agreed to until everything is agreed to, right? There are pieces until you get to the end. You don't really have a deal, and that's true,
right? And we saw over the spring and that spring and early summer period where the deal was 90% in place and everybody was sure that it was all set to be inked, and it fell apart at the last minute. That's pretty fresh in people's minds, but the market is still really confident that some sort of phase one deal is going to come through here.
Have we come to a conclusion of why it fell through in April?
The idea of a failed sort of meeting of the minds and cross drafts, and that was some of the commentary that we heard. But there was always
didn't the Chinese also kind of at the last second ask for a lot more?
Well, there was this. That was certainly the way the U.S. side characterized it,
right.
And
but we never necessarily didn't get confidence
because
it seems like maybe they're trying to play
I actually
their
don't
hand
think
again.
rollback and commitments on tariffs were on the table at that time either.
No, not at all.
They were not on the table, and so
this is within the last week.
Right, as we were talking about, but even at that time, so we go back to that time, you didn't have the September,
right,
or the October or the proposed December tariffs,
right,
weren't even on the table at that time. So it was just the tariffs that were existing in that time, and there wasn't real talk of rolling those back. And so we would look at it, and it seems the Chinese looked at it also and said, "What exactly do we get out of this?"
Right,
like the agreement is, we're going to do all of these things and double our ag purchases, and we get what exactly? And so that didn't look like a deal, and I think the Chinese looked at that and said, that doesn't look like a deal.
Well, the Chinese, if they got the sense that the Trump administration didn't really want to put on the December 15th tariffs anyway,
right.
Given their sensitivity to how these things might be playing through in the U.S. economy and being reflected in market.
Yeah,
we really like Christmas here.
So,
right,
in terms of look, that's the pain that could have come in the future. I think our base case is probably not going to come. Right, I think we don't think those tariffs are going to be put on. The tariffs that are on are causing, some economic harm here, some significant economic harm, and so I'm going to talk about that. Like, what have the tariffs done, and have that been a pressure here, and also. this, the numbers that we're seeing for of what the Chinese are going to do in terms of ag purchases, the numbers are talking about. I think someone said like $40 to $50 billion. We don't know over what time frame that is.
Yeah, it kind of phased in over 2 years is the sense. But the Chinese side has suggested that with the current tariff arrangements, they would be unable to get to those kind of levels with the current state of play in terms of their tariffs.
It would have to. So let's say it's $40 billion over 2 years. That we can. I mean, I say it's not only is that what they can do. We know that they can do it because that's what they did.
They've always done because they need to buy soy from us.
Well, they need to buy soy from somebody. And they're either buying it from us or they're buying it from the Brazilians. Yeah. And so they cut back on American soy and bought a lot more Brazilian soy, which is to say soybeans are a commodity and it's a global market and you can pretty much buy them anywhere depending on seasons and other and storage. And
so what about pork and the role that the swine flu is playing out in China? Do you think that's following through into these negotiations?
They definitely need to buy pork. They have it's their protein of choice. They're dealing with this swine flu, which doesn't seem to be abating. It's continuing to be a pretty significant.
I saw they lifted they put tariffs on Canadian pork, and they lifted it last week because of Huawei. Yeah.
And that feeds into the kind of dual perception that we've gotten from Wall Street on China's, their perceived expansion of this phase one deal. Mm. We've had some analysts that we've talked to saying this is basically proof that the Chinese are really desperate to get out from under these tariffs, and they really need to get them rolled off, and they're quite intent on having a clarity on this roll-off structure because it's hurting them so much. The other perception is the Chinese feel like they've got the upper hand in this round of negotiations because whether it's President Trump's domestic pressure and perceived weakness at home, whether it's his intolerance of downside for the U.S. economy and downside risks for the global financial markets, they feel like they can ask for more. We've heard both sides of that story, that perception.
Well, hey, what I want to get into, and we have Ross DeVol here, and so I'm going to take a break and come back to this question of how tariffs have impacted the Heartland, what they have been dealing with, their decades long involvement in trade and what it's meant for that region and what can be done about it. So we'll take a break here. You're listening to the HPS Macrocast.
Markets Policy Partners provide sophisticated financial market analysis that is independent, accessible, and actionable for a broad audience. Learn more at marketspolicy.com.
Hi, welcome back to the HPS Macrocast. We were talking about the trade war and what we saw in the 2016 election and elections since then, but it's been out there for a very long time. Is how certain regions and communities in the country have been dealing with pressures from globalization and trade, and it's not the only dynamic. There are lots of domestic dynamics as well that have impacted standards of living, and opportunity for people in large parts of America. And we're lucky to have my friend Ross DeVol here, who Ross I've known for years from his great work at the Milken Institute, and a wonderful economist and researcher there, and now leading up this effort that was a product of the inspiration at the Walton Family Foundation. You've moved to Bentonville, Arkansas.
I have,
and this is an important effort you're leading to try to get at some answers and strategies, at least good analysis to drive policy making and growth in these regions. What can you tell us a little bit about? You keep reminding me that if I say it's a think tank and you say we're a think and do tank, let's talk about the think part and the do part and what your mission is.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. So, having worked at the Milken Institute for a number of years, we always considered ourselves to be a think and do tank. Well, that's the way I described it. Others use different terminology. So the think part means conducting credible research that can lead to policy recommendations. So, we're focusing on innovation and entrepreneurship, building human capital, regional competitiveness, tax rates, cost of doing business, those kind of measures, but also health and well-being. Those are kind of the four pillars, if you will. But for me, research by itself, regardless, let's say it's very high quality, if you're not involved in trying to reach out to policymakers and stakeholders that can use your research and inform policymaking, what's the point of doing it? Mm-hmm. And so also having convenings of thoughtful people, sharing ideas, and trying to get to possible solutions. The do side is working with other collaborators, stakeholders in spaces like the entrepreneurship. We might work collaboratively with the Kauffman Foundation.
Yeah,
just done a lot of work there.
Kauffman Foundation, ton of work on entrepreneurship and small business development of small businesses.
Absolutely, but we're also going to be the program element. The do part is working with elected officials, governors, mayors, economic development officials, state legislatures, congressional delegations, in first continuing to educate on how the economy is changing and why are the coasts been doing better, the knowledge-based economy, technology-based economic development, you have a lot more entrepreneurship on the coast than you do in most places.
What are the factors for that? Why, like, if you were to identify the sort of characteristics for why why some of these communities in the coasts have done better, and are there opportunities in the Heartland for them to replicate or mimic and have the same kind of success?
So one is a greater recognition of movement towards the knowledge-based economy. So you've had research universities that for decades and 50 years have been heavily involved in research and commercialization. Think of MIT, Stanford on the West Coast, and the UC schools, University of California system, and you can look up and down the coast, the Research Triangle. There are outstanding research universities in the Heartland, but most of them have not seen commercialization as a core part of their mission. And so you've had these tech clusters develop on the coast. We talk about venture capital, the Sand Hill Road boys and girls, mostly boys, unfortunately still. Yeah. More girls, though. So part of it's you haven't had the leadership in Heartland that has really understood these changes taking place and make those investments. And so the human capital areas, you find not as many young people going into STEM degree programs. And so it's hard for some of these tech firms, when they're looking to expand elsewhere, they're looking for the workforce that they require. Yeah. And it's somewhat problematic. Now, that's a generalization. There are pockets in the Heartland that are doing exceptionally well. Think about Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, Nashville, Minneapolis, Kansas City.
Actually, I meant to ask you to define the Heartland region for us. Draw a picture for us of what's generally in and out. And I know that my home state of Pennsylvania has it's not in it, but certainly has characteristics within it of Heartland communities, a lot of Heartland type communities.
Yeah, this gets to be somewhat controversial. I wrote a paper last year trying to come up with a definition of the Heartland for our use because it means different things to different people. I kind of went through the evolution of it. Originally, like before World War II, it really was kind of Nebraska, Kansas, and maybe Missouri. And then after the World Trade, World Fair in Chicago in the 40s, it expanded. They used that. They called it the Heartland. Come to the Heartland. And you kind of trace it, how it expanded. In the end, what I came back to was looking at the central part of the country. And the Census Bureau has 9 census regions, and there are 4 of them that have central in their title. So East North Central, think of Ohio, Michigan, out to Wisconsin. Yeah. West North Central, North Dakota, South Dakota, all that area. And then East South Central, Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, and West South Central. So Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Texas included in the Heartland. So that's our definition of the Heartland. It's a big Heartland. People have said to me, well, how could you not include West Virginia? Well, it was originally part of Virginia, which was one of the 13 colonies, and You can't be in the heartland if you were one of the original 13 colonies. And unfortunately, that rolls out Western Pennsylvania as well. Now, once again, there are certainly elements of the heartland.
That's true, and I think it's good as a sort of a centralizing focus, and I don't think the states left out should feel bad about it. I think they're still going to be paying attention to what you're doing. You're working on the lessons and information learned.
So our approach, Tony, is going to be we conduct research looking at the country and metros, micropolitans, some of these smaller communities, because you have to be able to compare and contrast what has worked and what hasn't worked. And if you just look at the heartland in isolation, you're comparing yourself to yourself. But our due part, the implementation, working with policy officials, will be focused on the heartland. Mm-hmm. That's a core mission there. And we have a project underway right now looking at the importance of young firms in determining future job growth. And, I've been an econometrician, worked for Larry Klein at Penn for many years, and I am really excited and shocked at the same time to see that entrepreneurship and the knowledge intensiveness of young firms can really explain so much of the divergence in job creation around the country. It's remarkable. I did not believe that we would see that relationship at the micropolitan level. Mm-hmm. It's equally as strong at the micropolitan level as it is at the metropolitan level.
But explain to me the difference between metropolitan and micropolitan.
Yeah, so the Census Bureau has official definitions. A micropolitan are smaller communities. You have to have at least one town with 10,000. Mm-hmm. But it can't be more than 50,000.
Got it.
But you could have a group, like a county that has 3 or 4 places with 40,000 people. So there's some with 120,000, 130,000. A metro population generally starts close to 200,000, and there's different criteria you have to meet to be there, but it's kind of a dividing line.
Got it. Okay.
Many micropolitans aspire to become metropolitans.
We all do.
Yes.
Yeah.
How do you go about compiling data?
Well, you hire some good research staff. The first person I hired was an economist from the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank, who went to school at Auburn, is very passionate about this cause. Young guy, 26 years old, only a bachelor's degree, but he's so passionate about quantitative research. He takes online courses from MIT and all the other things that are available. And I've hired a lot of Frenchly minted PhDs over my career in economics, and this guy has skill sets equivalent to them in terms of the quantitative knowledge. Maybe not so much on the writing side, but definitely there. And, he's worked with these data sets. And, I used to work at Wharton Econometrics and ran their U.S. regional service for many years. Today it's part of IHS. And so, I followed these data sets. And what's really interesting, it's called the Longitudinal Employer Household Dynamics Database, the Census Bureau compiled, and it has all this information on young firms and their knowledge intensiveness as measured by the percent of employees at young firms that have bachelor's degrees or above at the county level. We've never had this information available before. Yeah. And so we're going to spend a lot of time kind of mining that and going through it. We have a first initial project coming out, but there's so much more we can learn from that.
Hey, Ross, could we take a couple minutes and just talk about how bring the trade war into this a little
Absolutely.
bit and talk about how that is impacting the region right now and how they're dealing with it? I saw a statistic last week, I think, that something on the order of 40% of ag sector profits are going to come from government transfers.
That's about right. Yeah. I did a paper, I guess early 2018 when China first came out with the retaliatory tariffs on U.S. products, and you looked at them. And so we decided to map them by county and looking at the agricultural products in terms of where those products were grown, who had the highest propensity to export to China. And what you see is the Chinese were very thoughtful. They targeted Trump country, put maximum pressure on it, and it has really hurt the performance of many of those economies in the center of the country. Farm income's down anywhere from 25 to 40%.
Wow.
North Dakota has been hit the hardest because they exported the highest proportion of their crop production to China. And so, we've had the shale oil boom up there. That's dissipated somewhat, and so you're starting to see North Dakota not being at the top of the growth trajectory any longer. But these communities are really hurting, and I think this goes back to the trade negotiations. Trump needs to declare a victory, as he approaches re-election time, and I think that election cycle is probably encouraging him to declare victory earlier than he otherwise would have. And so, the administration has been trying to help farmers, with the transfer payments. Farmers will accept it; they don't like it.
I've actually, there's this view on some farmers taking, getting these payments. I've never met a farmer who likes it. They all, they hate taking them. They would rather just get, a fair price for their, for their product.
That's right. But for the most part, they're still with Trump if you can be with him on it.
You mentioned the shale oil boom and how it's leveled off to some extent, and obviously in the Democratic Senator Warren has put her marker down to ban fracking, and it's still controversial. Could you give us your sense of the state of play on this, and where do the Midwestern communities, the Heartland communities, come down on this issue?
There's a great deal of divergence, but in general, most communities support it. They want to see that it's done thoughtfully, and they've kind of changed the chemical mix and composition. And
They support frack. They support frack.
They support fracking in general. There are exceptions to that. But if you look at some of these communities, small communities like Pecos, Texas, was number one in our most dynamic micropolitans. Very small community in West Texas, out there in the Permian Basin. You've got people living in trailers. You want to see technology applied. They have these drilling platforms that they get up and walk to drill the next hole, right? And so it's actually very technology intensive. You have people, that are highly trained engineers in some cases out on these machines, and they're drilling, and they have joysticks, right? And you can see how they're located. They know where the deposits are. They have the 3D schematics of it, and they're drilling. There's 6 different directions they're going at once, and it's really interesting. And so, look, if it weren't for fracking, with the attack on Saudi oil fields, the price of oil would have gone to $150 a barrel overnight. But we have added about 5 to 6 million barrels of production in the U.S. in the past 5, 6, 7 years. And it changes the dynamics of the geopolitics of the Middle East substantially. So when people say they want to ban fracking, I say, well, think about how this relates to the geopolitics of the Middle East. And we may have to spend more to protect oil supplies in the Middle East. We would rather have them at home.
Well, you talked about some of the technology around this, which I would love for us to come back and talk a little bit about this, because to me, this is one of the things about the attributes of the Heartland that they have, that they could take advantage of, right? And there are things like, agriculture. In a world where everything is technology, right? Knowledge and technology having to do with, growing crops, preparing the land, doing it in sustainable ways, raising, cattle or pigs or whatever it is that you're going to raise. There's an enormous amount of IP and technology behind it. Extractive industries, again, doing it in safe and sustainable ways to get the things out of the ground that we need to have a growing economy. We have enormous wealth of knowledge in especially these universities in the Heartland that may be coming into their time, and a lot of knowledge on using water resources that are that are knowledge that they have that are useful not just in the United States but actually globally, and can make a contribution to future production of food and raising protein, and using water in appropriate and sustainable ways, creating more water, all of this in ways that are sustainable from a production standpoint and from an environmental standpoint.
And many of the public universities in the Heartland have a comparative advantage in these areas.
They do, yeah.
And so you look at how can you apply irrigation water to crops in the most efficient manner. There's technologies using GPS and
AI. They're applying AI to exactly those kinds of problems.
Absolutely. And so when you're applying fertilizer to a field, you don't want to apply it equally throughout. And so it lets you know segments of the field where you need to apply it a regular amount, and other places where it just needs a little bit. And so you can reduce the amount of fertilizer, increase efficiencies. And so, and we're seeing a lot of really advances in protein. Tyson Foods is based in Northwest Arkansas, where I live, and they're producing non-animal protein products now.
Yeah, there's I know that obviously we should be prideful of Silicon Valley and the sort of the knowledge that we have created here in certain areas. There's a sexiness to what they're doing, and people don't think about what's happening where technology and know-how are being applied in all across the country in ways that are really set up, I think, for enormous growth opportunities over the long term. And I know you focusing on, with the universities, focusing on commercialization of some of these things. It could be sexy, right? It actually could be talking about countries saying, well, we should create our own Silicon Valley, and they may be saying we should be creating our own Wichita or wherever it is where the knowledge is. Houston even on its knowledge on everything from petroleum and other extractive industries to medical devices and things like that. Right. They are there. The knowledge is there, and there's demand for these that is about as far as the eye can see.
That's right. One of the challenges the Heartland faces is it has outstanding research at public and private universities. It hasn't been as focused on commercializing that research. So that is a challenge. I think that can be aided, but at a lot of these universities, the agricultural science is where you find the highest licensing income from the IP that's been generated. Mm-hmm. And people don't really recognize this, but it is vital. But clearly, the Heartland needs to produce more engineers, more people in STEM, and we're starting to see young people who went to college, went to STEM degrees that went to the coast. Early signs, we have a study coming out in a couple of months. And it looks like more millennials are starting to come back and looking at options in the Heartland because, a 1,200 square foot apartment in San Francisco, $6,000 a month. And for young people that are looking to start a family, already have, and if you're not going to be in the money in 3 to 4 years, you can't afford a down payment for a house. $1 million minimum for 1,500 70s style ranch house anywhere in the Silicon Valley or Seattle. And so we're interviewing some people who have made the decision to return. And typically they're starting a family. They can get close to the same wage back in the Heartland, but once you adjust for the cost of living, it's like they can afford a house now.
Yeah. Ross, we could talk about this for for 2 hours. I definitely want to invite you back. We want to come back as you go along, and we're partners in supporting the work that you're doing. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll take a break, and we'll be right back with a look ahead to next week.
HPS is excited to introduce our listeners to Heartland Forward, a brand new think and do tank focused on advancing economic performance in the center of the country. This new research institute is the only one of its kind, located in and dedicated to the 20 states in the Heartland region. Led by Ross DeVol, former Chief Research Officer at the Milken Institute, Heartland Forward will publish original new research and advocate for fact-based solutions to foster job creation, knowledge-based and inclusive growth, and improved health outcomes in Heartland states. You can learn more about Heartland Forward by visiting heartlandforward.org or following them on Twitter @HeartlandFWD.
We're back on the Macrocast. John, we've saw a little light data this week. Markets responding to a lot of different things. We've got some more substantial data coming next week. What are markets looking for?
Yeah, the smattering of data we got this week really showed that there was some hint of stabilization, but it remains a pretty uneven and mixed bag. You get some upside surprises, some downside surprises, a little bit of stabilization in Europe, but at least the positive takeaways are it doesn't appear that the ongoing malaise in the manufacturing sector is spilling over really meaningfully into the services sector. There's broad stability on that front, and a sense that really investors are not necessarily focused so much on the contemporary numbers, but looking out at a quarter. Mm-hmm. They've got a sense that the trade truce and the fact that new tariffs haven't been put in place for a long time, and that rollbacks are potential. That's a real tailwind for their expectations, as well as the easing from major global central banks that has been in train now. It's been in the pipeline since very early in the year, and that tends to work with a lag. And so, finger in the wind, the expectation is that the fourth quarter might be still a little bit soggy, but perhaps everybody's interested in that what might happen in the first, second quarters of 2020 and playing for a rebound there. So we're seeing, obviously, Treasury yields ticking up. We're seeing commodity prices ticking up. Obviously, equities have been knocking on the doors of record highs and posting new record highs the last couple of weeks. So there's a sense that the growth outlook really is brightening. And next week's data, as I said, with people looking that far out, next week's data will still be interesting, but may not move the needle as much as it otherwise would.
Just one quick question on that. Also, I mean, so we're in tail end of earnings, I guess. We talked at the front end of earnings as to looking ahead to the season that earning expectations were low, and so we had lots of beats. Lots of beats. So, which everyone feels really good about, but they were beats on pretty low expectations.
Right. So on a year-over-year basis, the estimates are about the S&P earnings were down about 1%. There's a couple different measurements, but then for fourth quarter, it's expected to reaccelerate back up to about 4%. Mm-hmm. So I think people took that low bar, said, okay, things aren't disaster, and the outlooks that companies gave were optimistic enough to justify the current.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to squelch optimism.
No, of course not.
Right? I think
but it is important that it's one thing to beat, and it's another thing to actually have your year-over-year earnings go down.
Right. Yeah. I think I guess that's the context.
Exactly. Yeah. Next week, so in China, we get the fixed asset investment and then industrial production and retail sales. So they always do these three together. It's kind of a very interesting snapshot into the health of the Chinese economy. All these threes are still within expansionary territory, but over the course of the year, they've been decelerating. So this was an important data point, especially in terms of the trade war. And then in the U.S., we get the consumer price index for October. So that'll be our first look at how inflation prices are doing. And then, really, the big data point for the week is U.S. retail sales for October, because in September they unexpectedly fell about 3%, which was the first time in a number of months that they've fallen.
And really, sort of the only mark out there against on the story that the consumer's doing great and holding up well, because jobs have been great, job creation's been great, exceeding expectations, wage growth has been picking up, especially on the bottom quintiles of workers, and then we had this fall in retail sales, which sort of came as a surprise.
I think it did come after a very strong. So on a month-to-month basis in September or in August, it was up 0.6%. So it was coming off a high base. So I think the market kind of looked through that. But if you have another soggy retail, and this other data point isn't necessarily massively market moving, but in terms of an indicator for how the economy is doing, the NFIB Small Business Optimism Index is one of my favorites. So we get that next week, and that has really been holding in quite well. It's at 101.8. We were at a high of about 110, so it's come off over the course of the year, but still, a bad reading for that is like in the low 90s and high 80s.
And then I guess we'll have, as always, more back and forth drama in the trade war.
Yep.
To come back to again.
I think we'll probably talk about it again next week.
I'm certain that we will, and it's what I look forward to every Friday. For John and Brendan and my good friend joining this week, Ross DeVol. That's the HPS Macrocast. We'll see you next week. Have a great weekend.
Thank you for listening to the HPS Macrocast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and share. Find more from Hamilton Place Strategies at hamiltonplacestrategies.com and follow Tony Fratto on Twitter @TonyFratto. Learn more about John Fagan, Brendan Walsh, and the work they do at Markets Policy Partners by visiting marketspolicy.com.